The skyline of Chicago glittered like glass set on fire. From the 30th floor of the Lakeside Pavilion, the city buzzed beneath them, oblivious to the celebration above. String lights hung like stars overhead, casting golden halos on the white linen tables. A jazz quartet played soft music near the terrace. Glasses clinked. Laughter danced through the air. Eleanor Whitman stood near the bar, her hand lightly clasped around a sparkling water. She hadn't touched alcohol in years, not since Douglas's first health scare. She glanced across the room where her husband stood beaming, surrounded by colleagues, their grown daughter Olivia, and a woman who had become far too familiar. Kara Benson, his secretary of 4 years, stood right beside him. Again. She wore a red silk dress that clung too tightly for a work function and laughed with that overly generous smile she reserved for married men. Her hand brushed Douglas's arm too easily. Her lipstick matched her wine. Eleanor watched the scene like someone watching the final act of a play she'd seen too many times. The smirk on Douglas's face, the way he leaned toward Kara as she whispered something, the faint blush on his neck. It all confirmed what she already knew. But knowing something and proving it, those were two different things. The envelope in her purse weighed heavier than her wedding ring tonight. Across the room, Olivia entered, late as usual, coat still half on, breath caught from rushing. She looked around, eyes narrowing as she took in Kara's proximity to her father. "Seriously?" she muttered, approaching her mother. "She's standing next to him again?" Eleanor didn't look away. "It's his big night," she said, voice even. "Let him enjoy it." Olivia turned to her sharply. "Don't do that. Don't pretend this is normal." Eleanor finally met her daughter's gaze. There was worry there, but no panic. Just a slow, rising storm behind her green eyes. "I'm not pretending. I'm watching." That seemed to startle Olivia. She lowered her voice. "You're really going through with it." Eleanor offered a tight smile. "I said I would." Nearby, Henry Lou, Douglas's longtime business partner, gave a toast to the table. He called Douglas a pillar of leadership and the kind of man who made others better. Eleanor nearly laughed. She wondered if Henry ever saw the man behind the suits and quarterly reports, the man who had slowly stopped being hers. As the applause faded, Douglas tapped his glass and stood. He launched into a speech full of practiced warmth. How 38 years in the finance industry had been a gift. How teamwork made every success sweeter. How grateful he was to the people in this room. He paused and turned toward Eleanor. "And of course," he said, voice dipping into that performative sincerity, "my wife, Eleanor. My anchor, the quiet engine behind every success. Let's raise a glass to her as, well." There was polite applause, scattered and soft. Kara touched Douglas's back gently as he sat down. Eleanor lifted her glass and nodded, but inside something cracked. Not from anger. No, that had burned itself out months ago. It was something colder, final, the sound of something once sacred, quietly disintegrating into truth. She placed her glass down carefully and stepped toward the podium. The host tapped the mic. "Now Eleanor Whitman would like to say a few words." A hush fell over the rooftop. She walked slowly, not nervous, not rushed, composed. Her navy blue dress moved with elegance, the pearls at her neck a quiet echo of who she used to be. She reached the microphone, cleared her throat, and smiled. "Thank you for being here tonight. It means a great deal, to Douglas and to me. Retirement is a strange kind of ending, isn't it? You give decades of your life to something, and then suddenly it's over. But some endings don't arrive suddenly. Some unfold in silence, over time, behind closed doors." She paused. People leaned in. Her fingers brushed the manila envelope inside her purse. She looked up at the skyline, then back at the room, her voice now firm. "And sometimes an ending is exactly what someone deserves." Months before the party, before the rooftop lights and the final toast, the betrayal had already begun unraveling in Eleanor's quiet, tidy world. It started as most betrayals do, not with an explosion, but a whisper, a folded receipt tucked into the inner pocket of Douglas's sport coat. Eleanor had found it while gathering laundry, a task she'd done 1,000 times across their marriage. She was folding his dry clean-only shirts when the slip of paper fluttered out. A hotel reservation, downtown, charged to the company. Eleanor had blinked, unsure what she was looking at. The date, a Tuesday, the name, Kara Benson. She stood in the middle of their laundry room for a full minute, receipt trembling in her hand. It meant nothing on its own, nothing provable, but it felt like a hairline crack along the surface of glass, dangerous, invisible until it shattered. That night she said nothing. Instead, she watched. She watched how Douglas had started going to conferences again, how he'd come home late with cologne that didn't belong to him. He had always used cedarwood. Now he smelled like vanilla and musk. She watched how his phone rarely left his hand anymore, how he turned the screen downward at dinner. She watched Kara. Kara, with her too perfect hair and that laugh that fluttered at the wrong pitch. Kara, who began calling their home at night, accidentally. Kara, who brought Douglas a silk tie on his birthday. Just one, red, too bold for him. Eleanor had unwrapped it herself. "I thought she was just grateful," Douglas had said. "She's young, enthusiastic." Eleanor didn't argue. She stopped arguing months ago. Instead, she called Olivia. Her daughter's voice cracked through the speaker. "You think he's having an affair with her?" "I don't know what I think," Eleanor whispered, "but I'm starting to document." That week, Eleanor made 2 calls. The first was to Gloria, her longtime friend and retired lawyer, who advised her, "Don't confront him until you're ready to leave. Make sure you hold the truth in your hands, not just your heart." The second was to a private investigator, quiet, efficient, professional. The woman didn't blink when Eleanor slid a photo of Douglas across the cafe table. "Find out where he goes," Eleanor had said. "And who with?" 2 weeks later, the photos came. One showed Douglas and Kara stepping out of a luxury downtown suite. She was wearing his scarf. Another showed them at a wine bar Eleanor once loved, his hand grazing Kara's lower back. Eleanor took the envelope home, sat at the kitchen table, turned the pages one by one. Not a single tear, only stillness, the kind that lives in the eye of a storm. That weekend, Douglas suggested they downsize the house and travel more. Said it would be freeing. Eleanor agreed with a smile. He didn't notice how tightly her hand gripped the edge of the chair. She began preparing. Each movement was quiet, intentional. She made copies of the evidence and stored them in a locked drawer. She created a private folder on her computer titled Retirement Materials. She even played nice with Kara, praised her efficiency, let her handle the guest list for the party. Kara had smiled and said, "I'll make sure it's unforgettable." Eleanor had whispered, "I'm counting on it." It wasn't revenge. Not really, it was closure. On her terms. When Eleanor finally told Olivia the full truth, they sat on the edge of her bed, feet barely touching the carpet. "Why not just leave now?" Olivia had asked, furious. Eleanor had turned to her daughter with a calm fierceness. "Because I will not disappear. Not quietly. Not after 40 years of building his name, his life, his career." She patted her purse, the envelope safely tucked inside. "He taught me to stand behind him. Now he'll learn what it feels like when I stand up for myself." The kitchen used to be Eleanor's favorite part of the house. Sunlight in the morning, the scent of fresh ground coffee, quiet conversations before the world stirred. But lately the air had changed. Douglas sat at the table with a half-read newspaper and untouched toast. His phone buzzed face down beside him, vibrating like a heartbeat Eleanor didn't trust. Eleanor placed a ceramic mug in front of him. Black, just how you like it. He didn't look up. "Thanks." She sat across from him, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I was thinking, maybe we could take a trip next month. You and me, somewhere quiet." Douglas flipped the page. "Might be busy. Kara and I are mapping out a few client dinners. Transitional stuff." Her hand. "Stop moving." "Kara's involved in your retirement plans now?" He shrugged. "She's efficient. Knows how I work. She knows a lot, apparently." That made him look up. "What's that supposed to mean?" Eleanor offered a tight smile. "Just an observation." He snorted. "Are we really going to do this? At breakfast?" "No," she said quietly. "We're not." That evening, he didn't come home for dinner. Claimed a last-minute dinner with a partner who was passing through town. No mention of names. No apology. Eleanor cleaned the dishes alone. The silence was too loud, the clock ticking too sharply. She went into the living room, sat in his recliner, and stared at the phone on the side table. Then she picked it up. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from restraint. She checked the recent calls. Kara's number, twice. One outgoing, one incoming. It was late. Still, she pressed call. Kara answered quickly, her voice far too alert for that hour. Douglas? Eleanor didn't speak. Douglas? Silence. Then Eleanor hung up. And just like that, confirmation. She didn't need the photos anymore. Didn't need the lipstick-stained receipts, the USB drive, or the emails from the private investigator. She had heard it in Kara's voice. That subtle panic. That ownership. The next morning, Douglas acted as though nothing had happened. He kissed her cheek before grabbing his briefcase. Told her he'd be home late. Again. That was when Eleanor finally called Olivia. Her daughter's voice came through the line with a crackle of concern. How are you still standing? Because, Eleanor replied, her voice low and steady, I've been standing alone for a long time. I just didn't realize how far away he'd moved. I'm coming home early. I want to be there for the party. Not for the party, Eleanor corrected gently. For the reveal. Olivia paused. You're sure? I'm not walking out empty-handed, Eleanor said. I gave him my youth, my loyalty, my silence. I'll walk out with the truth. That afternoon, she met with the event coordinator, Kara's assistant, a young man who didn't ask many questions. Eleanor requested a podium, a 5-minute slot for a wife's speech. No one batted an eye. Then she asked about tech. There's a projector, right? She asked. Yes, ma'am. HDMI or USB, whatever you need. She smiled. Perfect. Back home, she sat on the edge of their bed, her side perfectly made, his side still rumpled, and stared at the ceiling fan spinning above her. In her lap, the USB drive. On the screen, Douglas with Kara beside him, at a wine bar they used to visit for anniversaries. He touched her cheek. She leaned in. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. He hadn't just cheated. He had replaced her. And that was a second betrayal Eleanor could not forgive. She closed the laptop, folded her hands, and sat in the silence she now owned. In 5 days, the truth would no longer live in shadows. It would stand on a stage, under lights Douglas paid for, with a microphone in Eleanor's hand. And Kara, she'd be front row. 4 days before the party, Kara showed up at the house under the guise of final event prep. She swept in confidently, heels clicking against the polished hardwood, holding swatches of linen in one hand and a clipboard in the other, as if she'd been managing Eleanor's home for years. I just need Douglas to sign off on the seating chart, she chirped, barely acknowledging Eleanor standing by the stairs. He's at the club, Eleanor replied smoothly, but I can look it over. Kara hesitated. Actually, it's probably best if Doug... Eleanor stepped forward, took the clipboard without asking. You've done a wonderful job organizing, but I'm still his wife. I'd like to see who's sitting where. Kara's lips parted, but she smiled, thinly. Of course. Eleanor's eyes scanned the chart. Kara was listed at table 1, beside Douglas. Henry Liu, Douglas's oldest friend and business partner, was at table 2. Olivia's name was pushed to the end of table 4, near the balcony. Eleanor tapped the page with one manicured finger. This won't work. Henry should be at table 1. He helped build this firm. And Olivia, well, she's his daughter. Surely she shouldn't be seated next to the waitstaff door. Oh, I just thought... No, Eleanor interrupted. You didn't think. You assumed. Kara's cheeks flushed. I'll have this revised, Eleanor added, handing the clipboard back. Thank you for your help. That night, Olivia arrived by train. She dropped her suitcase in the foyer and immediately wrapped Eleanor in a tight hug. You okay? She asked. Eleanor exhaled into her shoulder. I will be. They spent the next hour sitting at the dining table with wine and quiet conversation. Olivia flipped through the printed photos Eleanor had laid out like cards. She grimaced at each one. How long has this been going on? She whispered. Too long, Eleanor said. And the worst part, she added, pausing, he didn't even try to hide it. Not really. It's like he believed I'd always be there, no matter how many times he disappeared. Olivia's voice was tight. He underestimated you. Eleanor nodded. He still does. The day before the party, Kara sent a group message to the planning team, suggesting that she introduce Douglas on stage. Eleanor replied first. Thank you, Kara. But as his wife of 40 years, I'll be the one giving the introduction in the closing words. I believe that's appropriate. The message was seen, but not replied to. Later that afternoon, Douglas came home early. I got your message, he said, leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen. Eleanor stirred a pot of soup. Which one? About Kara. You embarrassed her. Eleanor turned off the burner. I rearranged the seating chart. That's not embarrassing. That's etiquette. Douglas narrowed his eyes. You're making this personal. She faced him fully, spoon in hand. I was your partner in every corner of your life, your home, your business, your name. But suddenly I'm not even consulted for your retirement party? She offered to help. No, Eleanor corrected. She offered to replace me, and you let her. He didn't answer. Eleanor stepped closer, voice calm but slicing. I'm not your afterthought, not anymore. She left him standing there as she walked upstairs. Behind her, silence. The next morning, Eleanor visited the event venue one last time to confirm everything. The floral arrangements, the microphone, the projector and screen. The young technician tested the display. It works like a charm, he said. Good, Eleanor replied, because it needs to work flawlessly. In her handbag, the USB stick rested beside a folded note she'd written and rewritten a dozen times. It began with, "This isn't a speech, it's a confession, but not mine." As she stepped back into the elevator, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Silver gray hair pinned neatly, pearl earrings, steady gaze. She didn't look broken. She looked ready. The sun dipped behind the buildings of downtown Chicago, casting long shadows across the skyline as soft jazz floated through the rooftop venue. The lights were dimmed just enough to glow, chandeliers catching glimmers of gold from the champagne flutes in every hand. Guests buzzed with anticipation. It was the end of an era. Douglas Whitman, the face of Whitman and Lowe Financial, was retiring after 40 years. The celebration had been months in the making. Elegant name cards, a catered dinner, a slideshow with photos of Douglas in his early career, beaming in boardrooms, laughing at corporate retreats, shaking hands with governors. Eleanor stood in the back of the room, just behind the last round table. She watched it all, the curated celebration of a man she used to know, the man she thought she'd grow old beside, sipping coffee and watching grandkids tumble through the yard. But Douglas had chosen a different ending, one written in hotel receipts and late-night whispers. Across the room, Kara glided between tables in a fitted emerald dress. Her heels clicked in perfect rhythm with the playlist she herself had selected. She stopped beside Douglas, adjusted his lapel, and touched his arm with a familiarity that made several guests raise their brows. Olivia saw it too. She caught her mother's eye and gave a slight shake of her head, lips pressed thin. Eleanor nodded. She wasn't angry anymore. Not really. She was just done being invisible. At 7:45 p.m. sharp, Henry Liu stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed, voice full of warmth and age, if I could have your attention. The chatter died down. Heads turned, forks dropped. Tonight, we say goodbye, not to a man but to a legend, Henry continued. Douglas Whitman isn't just retiring. He's leaving behind a legacy of leadership, mentorship, and ambition that shaped this firm from the ground up. Polite applause echoed across the room. Douglas grinned, modest, lifting his glass toward Henry. I remember when Doug used to photocopy his own memos, Henry added, drawing chuckles from the older partners. And now? He's built an empire. More applause. And behind every empire, Henry said, pausing, is a queen. He turned toward the back of the room. Eleanor, would you join us up here? We'd be honored to hear a few words from the woman who stood beside Doug every step of the way. There it was. Eleanor felt a sudden hush fall over the space. Even the servers paused as she walked toward the stage, her heels tapping with calm precision. She could feel Kara's eyes on her, and Douglas's. Her fingers brushed the envelope inside her handbag. She stepped up to the podium, smiled. Thank you, Henry, and thank you all for being here tonight. This evening is a celebration, but for me, it's also a moment of truth. The crowd leaned in. Douglas and I have been married for over 40 years. We've weathered storms, raised a beautiful daughter, and supported one another through every twist of life. A few nods. Olivia looked down. But marriage, Eleanor continued, like leadership, requires honesty, integrity, and sometimes accountability. A flicker of unease ran through the room. Kara fidgeted. Douglas straightened in his seat. Eleanor's voice didn't waver. I've spent the last few months watching from the sidelines, watching my husband rewrite our story without my consent. She paused, reached into her bag. And tonight, I'd like to offer a different slideshow, one not shown during dinner. The technician, alerted by a small nod from Olivia, activated the screen behind her. The soft music faded. The lights dimmed slightly. Click. The first photo. Douglas, seated across from Kara at an upscale bistro, hand resting on hers. Click. The second. Them entering a boutique hotel, laughing under one umbrella. Click. The third, a photo Eleanor herself had taken, standing across the street watching them from her car. Kara was in his coat. Gas rippled. A fork clattered. Douglas stood up abruptly. Eleanor, what are you doing? Eleanor held up a hand. No interruptions, she said calmly. She turned back to the microphone. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. You all came here to honor a man of great success, but I refuse to allow his betrayal to be dressed in applause. Kara stood pale. You're humiliating yourself. No, Eleanor cut in. I'm reclaiming myself. Silence. Then Eleanor reached into her bag again and pulled out a single document. The guest watched as she unfolded it on the podium. A letter, she said softly, from the woman I used to be, and the woman I became, after finding out the man I loved shared his life with someone else. Douglas's face had turned stone. Eleanor looked straight at him. You could have left. You could have been honest. But instead, you let her stand beside me. You let her plan this party. She turned back to the crowd. And now, it's hers too. The lights stayed dim. No one clapped. Eleanor walked down the stage slowly, past Douglas, past Kara, past every stunned face in that room. And this time, no one stopped her. Eleanor didn't glance back as she stepped down from the stage. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, but the silence behind her was deafening. No jazz, no applause. No one even moved. The guests, all in suits and gowns, looked stunned, like they were suddenly attending the wrong event. Champagne glasses hovered halfway to mouths. Someone whispered, Did she just? Yes, she did. Douglas remained rooted at table 1, gripping the edge of the chair he hadn't even managed to sit back in. His face had lost all color. Next to him, Kara looked like she might crumble on the spot. Her hands shook as she reached for her purse, then froze midair, unsure whether to stay or run. Henry Liu stood up slowly, adjusting his tie as if trying to make sense of gravity again. He glanced toward Eleanor, then turned a long, disappointed look at Douglas. You should have told her yourself, he muttered, just loud enough for Douglas to hear. But Douglas said nothing. For once in his life, the man who'd always had the last word, at board meetings, at dinner tables, at every family argument, was speechless. And Eleanor? She reached Olivia near the back of the room and gently took her hand. The weight of that moment hung between them like a shared exhale. Olivia whispered, You were incredible. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She looked around the room, the old colleagues, the firm partners, the wives who used to envy her marriage, the interns who once asked her how to be the perfect corporate spouse. She saw it all now. They weren't just shocked. They were rearranging everything they thought they knew. Let's go, Eleanor finally said. But they didn't walk out quickly or with spectacle. They moved slowly with the grace of someone who no longer owed anyone an explanation. As they reached the elevator, Kara suddenly sprang up behind them. Wait, Eleanor! Eleanor stopped. I didn't mean for it to happen, Kara stammered. It started After the holidays. I didn't know how to stop it. He said you didn't care anymore, that you barely spoke. Eleanor turned to her fully now, her voice quiet but blade sharp. You know what the saddest part is? She said. I believed him too. For years I believed the distance was just part of aging, of marriage. I thought I was supposed to disappear as he climbed higher. That was my mistake. Kara stepped back. I never hated you, Eleanor added. I just pitied you, because one day he'll trade you in too. Maybe not for someone younger, but someone newer. That's how this works. Douglas had followed behind now, his face flushed, eyes pleading. Eleanor, please. This isn't how we should end. Eleanor took a breath, stepped closer, and for the first time in years, looked her husband straight in the eye. This isn't the end, Douglas. This is the truth. The end happened a long time ago. You were just too distracted to notice. She turned and stepped into the elevator with Olivia, the doors slowly closing behind her. As they descended from the rooftop, Eleanor let herself lean gently against the elevator wall. It was done. The lie was no longer hers to carry. Back upstairs, guests murmured in pockets. Some quietly gathered their things. A few offered Douglas a stiff handshake. Others simply left without a word. The projector had gone dark. The slideshow was over. The man who wanted his career remembered with champagne toasts and curated stories now had a new legacy. A room that watched the truth unfold in real time. By the time Douglas finally sat down again, the seat beside him was empty. The hotel room Eleanor had booked wasn't extravagant. It overlooked a modest stretch of Lake Michigan and smelled faintly of lavender from the candle Olivia had lit earlier. 2 untouched cups of tea sat on the small desk. Outside the window, the city murmured quietly, far removed from the roaring silence of the rooftop. Eleanor sat by the window, barefoot, arms wrapped around her knees. You want to talk about it? Olivia asked gently, handing her a folded blanket. Eleanor shook her head. I want to feel it. All of it. Olivia sat beside her. You didn't just expose them. You freed yourself. Eleanor looked over at her daughter. Do you know what I kept thinking about in that moment, standing on that stage? Olivia waited. That I should have done it years ago. Maybe not publicly, but honestly. I let him convince me that marriage meant sacrifice, but it shouldn't have meant disappearing. Olivia rested her head on her mother's shoulder. You didn't disappear. You survived him. The next morning, Eleanor woke to a string of missed calls. From Douglas. From unknown numbers. Even one from Kara. She didn't answer any of them. Instead, she opened her email. At the top of her inbox was a message from the firm's legal department. Short, formal. They were launching an internal inquiry into Douglas's conduct. That same afternoon, a link began circulating in local news outlets. Retirement party bombshell, CEO's wife reveals affair on stage. The footage wasn't grainy. It had been filmed clearly by someone at table 5. The moment the projector lit up, the way Douglas froze, Eleanor's calm voice echoing through. The next she closed the laptop and let herself smile. Not cruelly, not with vengeance, with peace. By day 3, Henry Liu reached out. Eleanor met him at a small cafe near the lake. I should have said something, Henry admitted. I saw it months ago. I just figured it wasn't my place. You were right, Eleanor replied. It wasn't your place. It was mine. He nodded. Douglas won't recover from this. Not professionally. Eleanor sipped her tea. He shouldn't. Henry leaned forward. What are you going to do now? She looked out the window where seagulls danced above the water. I don't know, but for the first time in a long time, that doesn't scare me. Back at the hotel, Olivia was on the phone arranging a temporary rental for Eleanor in a quiet part of the suburbs. Nothing too big, just something that was hers. Douglas finally stopped calling by the end of the week. Not because he no longer wanted to, Eleanor knew that, but because silence had finally answered him louder than any argument ever could. Kara had reportedly quit the firm the next day, packed her desk and left. No forwarding address, no public statement. In a way, Eleanor didn't need one. She didn't want an apology. She wanted distance, dignity, decency, and she had taken back all 3. That night, Olivia surprised her with an old photo album. One Eleanor hadn't opened in over a decade. "I thought you might want to see who you used to be," Olivia said softly. Eleanor opened the first page. There she was, 30 years younger, standing at a school podium, addressing students. Another photo, holding newborn Olivia. Another, hiking with friends before marriage demanded a new identity. Tears welled up, but they didn't fall. She was remembering herself, piece by piece. The sun was just beginning to rise when Eleanor stepped out of the hotel and into the gentle hush of morning. Chicago hadn't fully woken yet. The traffic was a whisper. The streets were clean and damp from the early sprinklers. Overhead, the sky was painted with soft streaks of orange and blue, like someone had taken a brush to the clouds in forgiveness. Eleanor walked slowly along the lakefront path, hands in the pockets of her long beige coat. The wind tousled her silver-gray hair as she passed joggers, cyclists, dog walkers, none of whom knew her name, none of whom knew what she'd done or what she'd survived. And for once, she liked it that way. She wasn't Mrs. Douglas Whitman here. She wasn't someone's wife. She wasn't someone's shadow. She was just Eleanor. She found a wooden bench facing the water and sat down, folding her hands in her lap, watching the lake breathe against the shore. Her eyes settled on a pair of seagulls floating near the pier. Light caught on the ripples like small flames. For years, she'd molded herself to fit around Douglas's world, hosting, supporting, forgiving. She had poured herself into his life until her own shape was unrecognizable. And the tragedy wasn't just that he betrayed her. It was that she had allowed herself to shrink for so long. The revelation hadn't been about revenge. That would have been easy. Quick. What she did was harder. She reclaimed herself, publicly, deliberately. She remembered the way Douglas's eyes searched the crowd after she left the stage. How lost he looked when he realized no one was standing beside him anymore. Not Kara, not Olivia, not even Henry. He had built his legacy on applause. Eleanor didn't need applause. She had something stronger. Freedom. A soft chirp interrupted her thoughts. She pulled out her phone. A message from Olivia. "Heading to the apartment now. Call me if you need me." Eleanor typed a short reply. "Take your time. I'm exactly where I need to be." She set the phone aside and leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. The sunlight kissed her face, not in a grand, cinematic way, but in a quiet, affirming one. The kind of light that doesn't demand attention, the kind that simply is, just like her. Behind her, the city would soon wake. Emails would fly. People would talk. The firm would shift. Kara would disappear. Douglas would rewrite his own version of the story for those who wanted to believe it, but the truth was already out, and she didn't need to tell it twice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Her speech, the one she'd written and rewritten a dozen times. The ink was slightly smudged from her fingers that night. She held it for a moment, then let it go. The wind caught it and carried it gently toward the water. She didn't watch where it landed. She stood, taller now, straight. She had been a loyal wife, a patient mother, a gracious host, a background figure. But not anymore. Now she would be something else entirely. She would be a woman who walked out of a gilded prison and into her own story. The bench behind her stood empty, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt sacred, marked by a moment she would never need to repeat. As Eleanor began walking again, her shadow stretched before her. Long, whole, uninterrupted. The city may forget the headlines. The firm may remove her name from guest lists, but she would remember. And that was enough.